Okay, good morning, everyone. We are up to chapter 43, and this chapter of Tanya is in a sequence of the subject we have been discussing for the last two chapters, which is fear of Hashem being a necessary ingredient to the performance of mitzvahs. So whereas one would have thought that we need to love Hashem in order to motivate ourselves to do the mitzvahs, the Alter Rebbe explains to us that there has to be also a component of fear as a foundation, because love of Hashem, although there are very high levels of love, and actually this chapter will go into the high levels of love at the end of the chapter, but love is an emotion that has a selfish component. And that is why we can't only depend on love to motivate our fulfillment of the mitzvahs, but we do have to have the component of fear as a foundation, just in case we don't feel like doing the mitzvah in that moment or or on that day. Fear of Hashem, and meaning the accepting of the authority of Hashem, creates the foundation for us to do the mitzvahs anyways. But up till now, the Alter Rebbe explains in this chapter, what we have actually been discussing is what we call yira tata, a lower level fear, which is not such a low level, by the way. We all spend like many years of our lives trying to reach this level, but there are two levels of fear of Hashem. And this lower level fear, yira tata, is necessary both for the performance of mitzvahs and avoiding sin, and comes about through contemplation. So we now, in this chapter, are going to understand a little bit about the higher level fear, yira ilah, which can be understood by two seemingly contradicting verses in Pirkei Avos. So in Pirkei Avos it says, firstly, Im ein yira, ein chachma. If there is no fear, there is no wisdom. Now, in this context, the Chachamim use the word wisdom to represent the performance of mitzvahs, the study of Torah and performance of mitzvahs. So, im ein yira, if there is no fear, there is no performance of mitzvahs. In other words, fear must precede the fulfillment of Torah and mitzvahs. But then it says the opposite. It says, im ein chachma, if there is no wisdom, ein yira, there is no fear. So which comes first? So the Alter Rebbe explains to us that the first verse, which is im ein yira, ein chachma, there is no fear, there is no fulfillment of Torah mitzvahs, this refers to the lower level fear, which include, and he recaps from the last chapters, but it's a good recap for us now as well, arousing the natural fear which we have, an innate natural fear of Hashem, which every single Jew has as an inheritance from our patriarchs, the same way as we have a love of Hashem in that way. It is also a fear produced by contemplation of Hashem's greatness. This is still the lower level fear, okay? How do we contemplate Hashem's greatness? We contemplate that Hashem is firstly Mamale kol almin, he fills all the worlds. In other words, he fills all the worlds and creations according to their measurements and limitations. Hashem reveals himself in each world to the degree appropriate to that world, which means that every world that Hashem created, there is more and more concealment. So he reveals himself according to the level appropriate to that world. We contemplate upon the immensity of Hashem's power. For example, and in this chapter it gives us certain examples, the distance of the sky to the earth and different levels of the sky to the different levels of the sky. We think about the awesomeness and greatness of Hashem's creations. We also think about the fact that there are all different levels of angels in the order of creation, in the Seder Hishtalshelus, and all this brings about the level of lower level fear, yira tata. Why is this yira tata? It seems pretty awesome and pretty great to be contemplating on all of that and have it motivate your fulfillment of mitzvahs and avoidance of sin. We call it Yira Tata because the fear of Hashem comes as a result of the worlds, which are the garments of Hashem. We contemplate upon the greatness of Hashem as Hashem expresses himself in this world. Now, garments of Hashem are necessary for the creation of the worlds. Hashem needed garments for the creation of the worlds to enable Hashem to give life and existence to the world so that we should feel our existence and not return to nothingness. If we would not feel our existence, we would feel at one with Hashem, the world would not exist as we know it, right? In other words, it's a descent and concealment of Hashem, all these garments. And therefore, the fear that is based on the contemplation of this greatness and these worlds is considered to be a lower level fear. And this lower level fear brings as a result the fulfillment of Torah mitzvahs. So it's a very good level to have because it brings about behavior change, right? And that's why in Pirkei Avos, it first says, Im ein yira, ein chachma. If there is no yira tata, there is no chachma, performance of Torah and mitzvahs. This level of yira tata is also a kind of nullification before Hashem, but there are different types of nullification. So this type of nullification on the level of Yira Tata, says the Alter Rebbe, is called Bitul Hayesh, nullification of someone who is aware of himself. So in other words, we're very aware of ourselves, and yet we put aside our desires for the desires of Hashem because of this lower level fear. The higher level fear does not come about as a result of contemplating Hashem's activities or accomplishments, like we did in the first level fear, but of contemplating Hashem himself. What does this even mean? And it's actually called yiras boishes, a fear of embarrassment, where like Hashem is so great that we're embarrassed to be in his presence. So to explain, the Alter Rebbe gives a mashal, and he says it's the difference between the awe one feels in the presence of a king or in the presence of a tzaddik. So how do we feel awe in the presence of a king? So think about a king in terms of, a traditional king in the olden days that we read about that, gave decrees and had a lot of power. You were actually scared not of the king himself, but of the king's power. And when you are in the presence of the king, you don't feel your power, you feel the king's power, right? But it's the king's power. It's not the king himself. But in the presence of a tzaddik, you don't feel awe of his power, but you feel awe because of who he is, not the power that he has over people or things because he actually doesn't, but his innate greatness. And therefore, the person becomes completely nullified. You don't feel yourself in the presence of such greatness. You feel very insignificant. But it's the difference of identifying with the person's power or the person's essence. And this is the difference between Yira Tata and Yira Elah. Yira Tata is because of Hashem's power and his accomplishments and his magnificence. But Yira Elah is because of the essence of Hashem and who Hashem is. Therefore, Yira Elah is also known as Yiras Boishes, a fear of embarrassment, because it makes one feel ashamed because of our lack of truth. It's also a Yira Panimi, an internal fear that affects a person on an internal level as well. It's really a very high level. And therefore, we can now refer to the second verse in Pirkei Avos and say, Im ein chachma, ein yira. So we said before that chachma in these psukim refer to the performance of Torah and mitzvahs, which is true, because in actual fact, the way it works is that we need to have, it has to go in a sequence, an order. You can't jump the order. You first need to have yira tata, a lower level fear, which is brought about by contemplating Hashem's greatness. It then motivates you to do the mitzvahs, to learn Torah and do the mitzvahs, which is considered to be chachma, Hashem's chachma. But the word chachma also comes from an expression of nullification, of bitul, because of two things. First of all, the word chachma is kayach ma, like a potential force, potential strength. We don't know what it is. It's a question mark, and therefore there is nullification. And also there is a saying amongst the sages, Ezehu chacham haroya es hanoilad, who is wise. So literally it means because he sees who is born, what is born. But it is understood to mean, this pasuk, that he sees the future. Like if you're a wise person, you'll look into the future, you'll look into the consequences of your actions. But actually, the Alter Rebbe explains the meaning of the verse Haroya es hanoilad is because he sees how everything is born. It's all from Hashem, and Hashem maintains it in existence all the time. And that is why he feels completely nothing in comparison to Hashem. He is completely nullified and has a total bittul. So in the second verse in Pirkei Avos, what comes first is chachma, then bittul, and then we are actually gifted yira ilah. Yira ilah is not something that a person produces out of their own contemplation. Yira tata is, and if we go according to order, yira tata, performance of Torah mitzvahs, we are then nullified entirely before Hashem, and then we realize that the world is non-existent. Only the word of Hashem exists. The world is absorbed into the words of Hashem, like the rays of the sun are absorbed into the sun itself. So many times Hasidus gives this mashal of the rays of the sun. So when the rays of the sun leave the sun, you can see that they are their own, that they have an identity. But when you go to the source where they come from, the rays of the sun are not separate from the sun itself. They are one with the sun. And when we reach the level of Yira Ilah, you include yourself in this. So when one contemplates the world in this way, you develop a kind of bittul, which is not bittul hayesh, which we refer to in Yirat Hata, which is a nullification of someone who is aware of himself. He has a separate identity. But now, on this level, we develop what is called bittul b'metzius. We cease to exist, our existence. We are nullified in our existence. Our existence doesn't exist. We are not only powerless, we don't exist. We are one with Hashem. Ein od milvado, in the way that the speech of Hashem is united with the thought of Hashem. So Hashem created the world with speech, very differently to the way the human being speaks. When a human being speaks, the words we say leave our mouths and never come back, are never united with us. But when Hashem spoke the world into existence, it's as if we think about saying something and then don't say it, and then the thought stays with us. And Hashem's speech is like our thought united with us. So unlike a human being, but Hashem's speech is united with us, with him, and that is the level of bittul b'metzius, a nullification on the level of existence. However, one cannot attain this higher level fear without first having the performance of mitzvahs. And therefore, you need to develop a lower level fear, yirat hata, before a higher level fear. At this point in the Perek, the Alter Rebbe goes and compares this to the fact that there are two levels of love of Hashem. So now we go back to loving Hashem. Love of Hashem also has two levels. The lower level of love of Hashem is called ahavas olam. Also, it is considered to be the lower level of loving Hashem because it is through contemplation of Hashem's worlds. That's why it's called Ahavas Olam, right? Ahava Rabbah is the higher level love, which is also known as Ahavas Betanugim, a love which delights in Hashem's pleasures. Now, this is a level of love really only attained by tzaddikim, and also given as a reward to tzaddikim for their service of Hashem when they pass from this world. But the reason why it is considered a love of pleasure, because it is not a love of pursuit. It is a desire. When you have a love of pursuit is a desire for something you don't have yet. So you pursue it. You love it so much. We love Hashem that we thirst for Hashem, so we run after Hashem to do his mitzvahs, right? You feel far from Hashem, so you pursue Hashem. That's the love from pursuit, right? Motivated by pursuit. A higher level love, this Ahava Rabbah, is when you have already arrived at your destination. So tzaddikim have done this. And therefore it's a delight. You're like, I arrived, right? You feel close to Hashem. You don't feel far. It's considered a flame that shalheves ha'olam me'aleh, a fiery flame which rises by itself. It is not pursuing anything. It's not a result directly of efforts, but given as a gift to the person who is complete and whole in his fear of Hashem, which is the tzaddikim. So the love of Hashem that we gain as a gift is directly proportional to the fear of Hashem as well. Ahavas olam, the lower level love, comes as a result of contemplation. Now, how do we contemplate? We use our intellect, right? So we know that there are three parts to our intellect, chachma, bina, and das. And the last level of intellect, das, is what we use when we develop avas olam. So what is actual das? It's like connecting yourself to the knowledge. Like you know the knowledge, but now you're actually connecting and absorbing this knowledge. So through this contemplation, what happens is that a person transfers his love for worldly pleasures to the love of Hashem. So previously you loved something in the world, but now you've transferred that to Hashem. So it's a love of transference. The person, in other words, sheds all other interests and pursues Hashem. And it's still considered lower level love. Isn't that incredible? Interestingly enough, it sounds very passionate, right? But there are some more intellectual people that can also develop this level of love that are not such passionate people, right? So like, even if you know someone or you yourself are a more intellectual or a colder person who doesn't really take much pleasure in this world, there are some people that are just not so passionate. They don't really love the pleasures of this world. So how can they have a love of Hashem on this level? So you can fan the flames of the love of Hashem through contemplation. You don't necessarily have to have a love of this world in order to have a love of Hashem. So you don't transfer your love, but you arouse a love. So it's either an arousal of love or a transference of love. Now, there's something that the Alter Rebbe says here that's very, very interesting, because what we've been saying up till now is that love of Hashem is very important, but it has to be preceded by fear as a foundation, at least lower level fear, a very basic fear, and then we could develop a love. But now the Alter Rebbe actually gives us the exception to the rule, that there are sometimes an exception to the rule of like pursuing Hashem through contemplation or transferring your love, that this kind of love sometimes precedes fear. Such as in the case of a Rasha who does tshuva me'ava. It's when Hashem sends like a big wake-up call and you realize, oh my goodness, I love Hashem. Okay, now let's start again. And then you develop a fear, right? It's when Hashem really has pity on you and sends a huge amount of help for you to transform your life. And the reason is because contemplating on the level of das, right? Because we know that chachma, bina, das, gives birth to the emotions of love and fear Hashem. So sometimes it can produce fear, and sometimes it can produce love, and sometimes chesed expresses itself first before gvura. And this is a gift that Hashem sometimes gives us, but it doesn't come about from our own efforts. Our own efforts have to be fear first, love second, fear as a foundation, and then we develop the love. And remember that it's not fear of punishment, which that is like a very, very low level of love. It is fear of Hashem's greatness and awesomeness. Nevertheless, in the case where love precedes fear, love of Hashem precedes fear, the fear accompanies the love even in a very small way. So even if Hashem will send this great wake-up call causing you to realize you love Hashem, there will be a certain fear which is called yiras chet. You will fear the sin. You will be scared to sin when feeling such love, right? And this comes from a very basic level of remembering also what we said in chapter 41, that Hashem sees and hears everything. In the case where a little bit of fear accompanies the love, the fear is subconscious and the love is conscious. So you have to like tune into it to realize, oh yeah, I don't want to sin because I don't want to separate myself from Hashem. Hashem sees everything that I do, etc. It has to be intentional for you to actually reveal it. But again, this kind of order of love coming before fear is only in exceptional circumstances, says the Alter Rebbe. The proper order is for fear to precede love, even in a very small way. So avoda usually needs bechira and not hashgacha pratis. Hashgacha pratis, divine providence, we believe in divine providence, but that is not our service. So when Hashem sends this huge bolt of love and wake-up call, and you therefore, wow, you have no choice. It's like when Hashem held a mountain over Bnei Yisrael and he said, you know, I love you so much, are you going to accept the Torah? And they felt Hashem's love, and therefore they said, yeah, we're accepting the Torah. They didn't really think about it. If they loved Hashem or they feared Hashem, they loved Hashem at that point. So when Hashem does that in a way, in a certain way in our lives, that's exceptional and is not considered to be serving Hashem. So avoda really needs bechira, choice, and the choice is to fear Hashem. The choice also leads to the fulfillment of Torah mitzvahs, and then that brings about a love of Hashem. So it's actually when we begin studying Torah and doing mitzvahs that we actually are able to love Hashem. You cannot love Hashem properly without doing Torah mitzvahs. In other words, Torah mitzvahs brings love and necessitates fear. So you need fear, and it brings about love. The Alter Rebbe also brings the example of one of the Tanoim in the Gemara, Rebbe Eliezer ben Drudaya, who was at a very low level, was, before he did tshuva, but when he actually did tshuva, he cried so much from his tshuva that he actually expired. He reached the level of Ahava Rabbah, but the Alter Rebbe makes the distinction that this is actually the power of tshuva, not necessarily the power of love. So although he died, that's not the goal. The goal is actually to serve Hashem in this world with these levels of love and fear. Any observations or questions? Okay. Everyone's stumped today. Have a great week, everybody. And Mitzvah Hashem, we will continue next week.
Thank you,
Thank
Hannah.
you.